In this video, we're going to talk about how to get set up for Android development on Windows. I'm going to show you all the tools that you need to download to get set up for making Android apps on a Windows machine. Now, for part of this demo, I'll be sharing a screen on a machine that's running Windows 8. If you're running Windows 10, it might be slightly different, but it shouldn't be too far off. The first thing we're going to do is check if we're running a 64-bit or 32-bit machine. So go to your control panel. You can find it under Settings, Control Panel, and then click on System. And there you'll be able to find your system type. Mine says 64-bit operating system. So make a note if you've got a 64-bit or a 32-bit machine. Most modern computers will probably be 64-bit. Now it's time to check if you've got the Java Development Kit. The Java Development Kit is what you'll need to make Android apps, or any Java program for that matter. The JDK includes things like the Java runtime environment and the Java compiler. Here's how you can check if you've already got Java installed and can move on to the next step. If you're already set up with Java, you should be able to see a little icon on your control panel that reads Java. However, you'll also need to make sure you've got a relatively recent version. So click on the icon and then click About, and here you'll see a build number. This should read 1.8 or higher. So I don't have the very latest one installed. Mine reads version 8 update 77, which is fine. If you need to get hold of the JDK, the easiest way is to type Java Development Kit into Google and head to the Oracle website. On the Oracle website, you'll see the latest Java Development Kit available for download. To download the JDK, you first have to accept the license agreement. So click Accept and scroll down the list of options. Now for Windows users, there's going to be two options that are going to be relevant. There'll be the 64-bit version, the x64, and then there'll be the 32-bit version, which confusingly is labeled x86. Now if you've got a 64-bit machine like myself, and almost every computer that you would have bought in the past 3 years is 64-bit, you're going to download that x64.exe file. Otherwise, you're going to pick that file above to match it with your chipset. Once you've downloaded the file, execute it and just follow along with the wizard. After the JDK has finished installing, pick your destination folder and endure Oracle bragging how many devices run Java. After a successful install, you'll definitely see that Java icon appear in your control panel. And when you click on it, again, you'll be able to double check the version that you've just installed. As long as that version number reads 8 and above, you're fine. Now it's time to install Android Studio. Search for Download Android Studio in your browser, and then we're going to head to developer.android.com. From there, we're going to download the latest version of Android Studio. Again, we'll be presented with a wizard where we have to agree to the terms and conditions. I wonder who actually reads these. I'm pretty sure that by now I've promised somebody my firstborn child. Now, Android Studio is actually a pretty large file, and it seems to be getting larger with every update. Version 2.1 was 1.2 gigabytes, and version 2.3 is already 1.9 gigabytes. After the download has finished, follow the setup wizard to install it. You'll probably be presented with some sort of dialog box just like this. Just click I do not have a previous version of Android Studio and click OK. Now after you've done all that, here comes the best part. Fire up Android Studio. It's time to start that program. Now as you could already tell by the download file size, Android Studio is pretty enormous, and it's a pretty greedy program too. If it takes ages to run Android Studio and your computer is slow and frustrating to use, then check out my other video where I've put together some performance tips to speed things up a little. Now the first thing you actually want to do after installing Android Studio is check for updates. Click on that little gear icon where it says Configure and select Check for Updates. Chances are there are some updates available that you should install. Okay, so now we've got the JDK sorted and Android Studio sorted. Now it's time to configure our physical device so that we can install our apps on it. Take your physical Android phone and go to the settings. And then in the settings, scroll all the way down where it says About or About Phone. And there you'll have to look for something called a build number. So on this HTC that I've got, it's under Software Information and then More. And there it's buried as a line item. Now start tapping on that build number. After you've tapped on it a couple of times, you're going to see these messages start appearing. You are X steps away from being a developer. So after you've tapped it 7 times, you become part of the secret developer club, and a secret menu appears. So if you go back to your settings now, you'll see a menu that was previously hidden, namely the developer options menu. So go into the developer options for your phone and search for an item that reads USB debugging. Make sure you enable USB debugging, because ticking that option is crucial for making sure the phone is being recognized by the computer when you plug it in. Now, one of the difficulties with Android is that there isn't really one standard, and your menu might actually look slightly differently on your own phone. So let me show you a Nexus device for comparison. So this Nexus device had the build number buried in the About Phone section. So the message is, you're going to have to hunt around a little bit for this stuff depending on what kind of phone you've got and what kind of version of Android you're running. After you've enabled USB debugging on your phone or tablet, it's time to grab some USB cables. We're going to connect our device to our computer. Now, one thing I'll say about USB cables is make sure you get some good ones. Either use the ones that came with the device or use some good quality ones that you've got off Amazon. The way we're going to check that everything's working is we're going to open up Android Studio, start a new project, and plug in our phone to make sure it's being recognized. And that way we can check that everything's working and we're all set up and good to go. So start a new project in Android Studio and go through the wizard. Now, it doesn't really matter what you put in these fields for now because we're just going to start a blank project. After you've gone through the wizard, Android Studio will start building the project, which may take a little while depending on the speed of your machine, but after it's done, it should drop you off on a screen like this. On the tab at the bottom left, click on Android Monitor. This will bring up a small window at the bottom of the screen. At this point, you'll probably see a gray message reading Initializing ADB or Android Debug Bridge. This is the name of the tool that enables communication between your computer and your physical Android device. Now, plug in your Android device into your computer. Keep an eye on the phone screen because you might see a prompt where you have to trust the computer that you just plugged it into. If all went well, you should see log messages starting to scroll in the Android Monitor. Now, if you don't see your device appear in the Android Monitor and those log messages scrolling, there's a problem. Most likely is that you haven't enabled USB debugging. Take another look at the Android device that you've plugged in. In the status bar at the top, you should see some symbols that look similar to these. These symbols indicate that USB debugging is enabled, and you should also be able to see this in your notification drawer. Another common problem is a bad or damaged cable. So for this demo, I've actually used a pretty crappy cable to show you what can happen. So even though I've got my HTC plugged in, it's currently showing as disconnected. And that's because the cable is pretty shoddy and it loses the connection if it's not at just the right angle. Also, some cables out there just charge the device, they don't actually transfer any data. So it's really worth investing in a decent cable if you're going to be doing any Android development. It's also worth checking how your Android device is connected to your laptop. So if you pull down the notification drawer, you should see something like connected as MTP, Media Transfer Protocol. But this might not necessarily be your default option. If you see something else listed here like transfer files or supply power or use as media device, then click on that option and change it to MTP, because otherwise Android Studio won't necessarily pick it up. Now, one other thing that we've seen trip people up other than the USB debugging and the cable is device drivers, right? Now, a Windows machine needs a driver for every piece of hardware. A printer, a phone that you plug in, your graphics card, everything's got a driver, right? And if all goes well, Windows should be able to automatically download and install the necessary drivers when you plug in a new device. However, Windows doesn't always get it right, so you might have to actually download and install a driver manually. Now, hopefully it won't come to this, but if it does, the Android Studio developer website is actually good for helping people out. On the same page where you've downloaded Android Studio, you can go to User Guide, and then under Build and Run Your App, you'll see Install OEM USB Drivers. This is under a submenu called Run Apps on a Hardware Device. And there you'll see that the folks at Google have collated a list of manufacturers' websites. So depending on which phone you've got, you can select the relevant one and download the driver. So I hope this video was helpful in getting everything set up and working. In the next lesson, we're going to configure and tweak Android Studio a tiny bit so that it's a bit more helpful with our workflow. I'll see you there.